Republicans will crow and moan about the Bidens, but when it comes to getting their own house in order, pun intended, by the way, far too many Republicans are just missing in action here. Well, one of the two Republicans that signed on to that letter demanding a ban on congressional trading of stocks joins me now. Republican Congressman from Florida, Matt Gaetz, is here. Congressman, good to see you. I guess it took guts. There's only two of you signed on to this thing. What gives?
Well, whenever AOC and I have signed on to the same legislation, I just think all of America ought to take time out and really review it. And at a minimum, we ought to have a vote on it. This legislation to prohibit stock trades for members of Congress really goes to what we think about our Congress. If it's a place you go for a few years, do your service, and then return home, well, it's not really that much of a sacrifice to suspend trading during that period of time. But if you have people who are in Congress for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, well, they think, gosh, that's their entire opportunity to participate in the marketplace. I am hopeful that we would have a vote on this issue. The fact that you've got populists from the widest ends of the political spectrum coming together to say, hey, look, why don't we just make a deal in this country that you're on one side or the other? You're on the lawmaking side or you participate in the stock market. And I don't blame anyone who's followed the rules as they exist now, but the worst example has been Pelosi. When we had legislation to break up big tech, moving through the Judiciary Committee with bipartisan momentum, oddly, you had her husband buying big tech stock. And everyone thought, well, that's kind of weird. And then, lo and behold, she never brings those bills up for a vote in the House of Representatives. So now we have the benefit of time to say, gosh, maybe Nancy Pelosi's husband knew something about the trajectory of legislation that impacted the value of individual stocks. And that is the corruption that drives people nuts.
All right. So, look, I've seen violations of this so-called Stock Act. I think there was 52 examples of this from both sides of the aisle. The penalty is nothing. It's like $200 if you don't report properly your stock trades. Big deal when it comes to people making millions of dollars. So why is it that Republicans don't see this opportunity? I'm telling you, every moderate, every working class mom and pop out there wants to support what you're doing. Why can't they see it?
Well, frankly, we got too many Republicans who've benefited off of the system corruptly. And let's start with Richard Burr, who was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he was saying one thing to the American people and then doing something very different in his own stock trades. Now, should be fair to say the DOJ didn't prosecute him. They investigated him, and they decided to not move forward with charges, and everyone's innocent until proven guilty. But even if it's not illegal, it's swampy and it's icky, and it makes people feel like their representatives aren't really representing them, but they're representing their own financial interests. And we got too much of that in Washington on both sides, but we should at least have a vote. Let's just have a vote and figure out where people stand. If it loses, it loses, but then the American people will get to make a judgment.
Yeah. I find it totally ironic that everybody's coming after you. They say the DOJ is coming after you. They say everybody's coming after you, and you're one of the only two Republicans calling for transparency and to uphold the law. How does that work, Congressman Matt Gaetz?
Well, sometimes when they can't corrupt you one way, they try to compromise you another. And if that doesn't work, sometimes they try to totally destroy you. That's what the battle against the regime sometimes entails. But I'm a happy warrior, and I do see progress in the American people waking up, Grant. I mean, Joe Biden's got an approval rating that's hovering right above freezing at about 32%. And so if we're able to activate the country to get a new batch of fighters that bring this populism and this energy, we could actually do stuff like this that is bipartisan. I mean, usually we're talking about issues that Democrats will never agree with us on, but there are Democrats, in fact, more Democrats who say, hey, you know what? Let's just pick one side or the other, lawmaking or stock trader.
This is, I couldn't think of a bipartisan issue until this issue came up. This is the one that everybody can agree on. And so I'm going to do everything I can to push people towards it, Democrats and Republicans, to get this thing passed into law because I think it's good legislation. Congressman Matt Gaetz, thank you for being one of two signing on to it, and thank you for coming on the program tonight.
Hey, it's lonely sometimes, but never lonely when I've got the Stinchfield Nation with me.